What? No. No!
Oh my god.
He's really doing
the
this.
motherboard.
You haven't even lifted the socket lever yet.
So a channel with over 2 million subscribers built a PC recently, and the build and the guide itself is so bad to the point.
Hey guys, you're here at Hey guys, you're here at Doug, aka The Real One, coming at you today with another very interesting YouTube video. Normally I don't do reactions, surprise, sometimes unboxings, or roasts, but The Verge has made me do an exception. Yes. You might have seen this video recently they put out maybe a month ago on how to build a custom computer, and pretty much every tech site worth their salt has railed against them in hilarious fashion. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to throw in my 2 cents. Sorry, Jay. Now, to be fair, I get what they're trying to do. This is not a guide for everyone, for beginners, but there's still just so much egregiously wrong with this video that I'm going to just have to lay into them as a tech enthusiast and someone who, if you followed some of my Melchior X299 projects, building my own systems here, just can't let this one slide. So anyway, I'm going to play through the whole video here. I'll stop because I have so many points I want to cover. It'd just be easier to cover them as I go through each of the steps that their editor did here, as opposed to letting it play and comment at the end. So let's get to it. Now guys, I was originally going to do this like a one-off, as it's playing, off the cuff, one take, but I came up with so many just mind-boggling things with this video and guide that I have to write a script and kind of go off that. So forgive me for reading that in the corner, but here we go.
So a few years ago, TC, or managing editor, built a gaming desktop.
First off, Capital One. I mean, have you looked at what kind of card rates they have? Why'd you choose a bank sponsor? At least have a tech one that's relevant to the case of your video, but are you trying to encourage Capital One? Did they sponsor the build by giving you a loan, or what? Like, okay.
But it's kind of out of date, and it's definitely not going to hold up for Battlefield 5. So let's build a new one. You can build a gaming desktop for around $1,000, but I want to go all out, so I spent around $2,000. PC like this is going to be able to play most...
Okay, 2K is generally fine for a high-end gaming PC with some fast storage and overhead. You can maybe do it for less, but again, depends on what specific program you're using, so that's fine. This along with the PC part picker plug, which is getting better for compatibility, for conflicts, and general part scope of what's in the market, is actually pretty good. This is where they got things at least right, and I can give them a couple points for that, and well, that's about where it ends.
Games at ultra settings. So, what do you need to build a desktop? Well, of course, first you need a table. Preferably not metal. If it's going to be metal, have an anti-static working surface layered on top of it, a thermal paste applicator.
Okay, going back to the case. Okay. What case? Why did you choose this particular one? It's obviously boxy, it's not quite rectangular like most people have for small towers or even mid-towers or full towers. It's semi-unique form factor. You know, what did you plan to do that with cooling? Was it just space for the radiator? Maybe you could also explain for new builders that's easier to build when you have your case on the side. In the video you already do this, but for someone using this as a guide in a new build, it might be overlooked.
An Allen wrench, some tweezers to tighten up the wires, a Swiss Army
Thermal applicator? Really? Sometimes, yes, it makes sense. 99% of the time, no. Allen wrench, I've seen a lot of people rant rave and rip the Verge a new one because it's just a tool you'll never need. In my case, if you like to reference the Melchior X299 build I did, either part 1, 2, 3, 4, you'll see that actually some components like Alpha Cool and others need Allen wrenches for their fans or EK for some of their water block materials. So it depends on what parts you have and as to whether an Allen wrench or different sizes of Allen wrench, torques, and different pieces above a Phillips or flathead screwdriver is actually needed. So that's valid. I'll give them that. I'm not going to knock them for that. Tweezers. Don't you mean zip ties? Phillips, absolutely. Swiss Army knife? Debatable. Keep some real tools on hand.
Army knife, which hopefully has a Phillips head screwdriver in it. And last but not least, an anti-static bracelet, which is to protect you and the parts.
Anti-static bracelet, yes, that's true. Never used one. In all the builds I've done over like 10 years, never used one. No issues, ever. If you're building on carpet or other near static encouraging surfaces, sure, yes, that's helpful, or take off your socks, but personally I've never had the need for one.
These are the parts you're going to need, but more importantly, before we
Also,
get there...
parts that you're building with or parts that you need, keep your manuals and reference those. It might sound geeky and time-consuming and a hassle, but computers aren't quite the same as appliances. Your manuals will really have very useful information in them, some of your BIOS settings and unique aspects to your particular motherboard model, as well as maybe what RAM, obviously what configuration your RAM has to take. Some boards require different RAM in different slots. Any CPU backplates or retention mechanisms, maybe extra parts under the I/O as to where to put expansion cards, how to configure NVMe storage, your jumpers, where to connect your power. Having your manuals while doing a computer build is very helpful and recommended.
We need to understand what these parts are doing and how they interact with one another. To better understand the parts that make up a desktop, let's try to understand them individually. The processor is like the computer's brain, a base of calculations that control everything the computer does. The motherboard is like the foundation, serving as a main structure for all other parts to be added to. It also allows the other parts to communicate with one another, which also makes it kind of like a nervous system. Graphics cards...
Okay, I'll give you a +1 on the part graphic design and a little CG part there. That looks really cool. Get +1 for that.
Cards are responsible for rendering and processing visual.
-1 on your GPU. Your gold finger pins are on the wrong side.
Into what you see on screen. Our PC's power supply is of course channeling electricity, in that it adjusts and provides the right amount of energy to keep it running. Last but not least, RAM, or random access memory, and your hard drive are good examples of short-term and long-term memory, respectively. If you want to better understand what kind of computer to build, then first figure out what you want to use it for. A gamer might care more about a graphics card than, say, a video editor, who might want extra RAM to assist with editing large files. If you're building a budget build for video streaming, say under $1,000, you want to focus on parts, like a Core i5 or Core i3 processor, that require less energy. They'll be less powerful, but then you'll be able to scale back the cost of several other parts. And if you need help choosing the right parts for your build, there are sites like PCPartPicker.com that help show presets for which parts fit together, which sort of part conflicts you might have, and where to find deals on new parts.
Okay, overall that's not terribly bad. That's fairly straightforward. Still going to give them a -1 on rational. Now, he is right. It's good to understand how your parts interact, but he's building a gaming-specific PC. For a gamer and an average user watching this, they really just want to know, like, what part is good, or what they need for their specific game, hence all these "can I run this game" sites out there that will evaluate your hardware. A simple approach could have been said in this case, after this component layout, is For example, for Battlefield 5, since that's the game that's using a modest CPU and a strong GPU for the max settings, I choose this particular CPU and GPU because it's driven for that task at hand. I can agree that chip architecture, RAM timing, overclocking are advanced topics that don't belong in this video, and that's fine. Okay, so they're still doing only okay so far. I'll give them a +1 on building for need cases. Absolutely. That's what I did when I looked at my workflow for my X299 build. That's what I've done for other people's builds for gaming, or for those who often want to talk to me about, hey, I'm building a new machine, what parts do I want? Why is this good? Understanding the usage scenario and the intended design and flow of the machine from building to retirement will help obviously put the most value towards spending what money on the parts that you need, so I will give them that. And like I said before, PC Part Picker, great site, would recommend that if you want to look around the parts. So let's go to the nitty-gritty.
We have a lot of boxes and a lot of PC parts, so it's best if you unbox them, isolate the parts that you really need, place items into the case, and make sure that they all fit, and then start working.
Don't know about all that. That's a lot of stuff lying around and just going back and forth for boxes. I just unbox as I need them. Not everything at once. And sometimes you'll use something, or everything. Sometimes not. No. Usually if you're building a PC and you have an idea of what you're doing, rather than fitting your components, you'll size your components before you even purchase, or get a big enough case that you are certain your components will fit. Well, a medium case can fit an ATX board, and a smaller, it can't fit a larger one. Look at the board you'd like, and cooling you'd like, and size the case from there.
And now we're really going to start building by adding the motherboard in. Some notes about installing motherboards: they're really delicate, you should be really careful with them, and screw in with confidence, but also don't screw in too hard, otherwise you could crack the board.
Boards are moderately durable. Sure, you don't want to just touch and, hold them by capacitors and bump components on them. Don't drop or hit them willy-nilly, but it's not like if you just instantly touch them they will snap. They're layered circuitry, they're pretty durable. Next, screwing in, or just line up your screw holes with some light pressure and feel that you're inserting straight through. If a screw doesn't fit or it's jammed, trust me, you'll know. Most boards have washers and other preventative measures in place to protect a little against if you're over tightening, or as long as your things are good and you use the proper screws in your board components for the part that's meant, such as motherboards and motherboard standoffs going towards securing the motherboard and not other parts.
I chose Asus's Z370 motherboard for two main reasons. One, it has built-in Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, and also it has support for NVMe SSDs, meaning you can get really fast SSDs that are really easy to install.
Okay, board. Fair choice, nice extras. NVMe is great.
Pay close attention to the brace that goes at the back of the computer. You always have to make sure that you really hammer it in, because there's no screw. It really just has to go outside of the case and clasp onto the frame.
You mean the I/O shield? And no, it doesn't need to be hammered into place. You push it against the chassis and it snaps in. That's it.
And this is very important.
Inside of the case, you mean?
Because otherwise you can't align the motherboard correctly with the holes. We're just going to start installing all 8 screws. So next we're going to install the RAM on the motherboard. I chose Corsair's 16GB Vengeance LED RAM for two main reasons. One, it has LEDs and we do like lights in our gaming desktops. Secondly, it's pretty fast RAM. It's 2666 megahertz, I believe, so it's pretty fast, and this motherboard supports that speed, which is most important.
Lighting. As you see from my video, sure, I like lighting, that's fine. Otherwise, no. Sounds like pretty standard baseline DDR4 to me. Nothing special. Fairly cheap. Not even terribly that fast. It's like baseline. I have 3200 megahertz in my machine, and I don't think I've pushed it much yet at all, but the kits go much, much higher than that. So, no, 2666 is not really that fast. Key point here, well, yes, boards supporting RAM were more important in the old days, and you would run into conflicts or high RAM downclocking to lower speeds. DDR2 in prior eras, and that was important, and it is still valid. Unless you're buying a bleeding edge DDR4 4000 plus kit at top dollar or something even faster, all the modern boards, whether DDR3 or DDR4, can reasonably handle any compatible RAM you put at them. Now, be sure DDR4 gets a DDR4 capable board, but as long as you're matching your frequencies and capacities, it's fine.
Open the slots first and just aligning the stick with the middle of the strip, not with the end, and just lining that up with the logo.
Actually, making sure on a lot of boards now where they have the tabs only on one of the two sides of the RAM, lining up to the end can actually be valid to make sure that all your gold fingers and prongs are lining up. In a bay of 4 sticks, if they're very tight, lining to the end is helpful. Some boards only latch from one direction, so it is nice to make sure that those are lined. Of course, just make sure that your short and long orientation is lined up. Sometimes labels will all be on one side, sometimes on the other, but that's that. And yes, push center from the center firmly down until it clicks and you see the tabs lock up.
So once you hear that solid clasp and you don't see the gold connectors on the side anymore, that's when you know the RAM is in. Step 3, we're going to install the hard drive, or in this case, the NVMe SSD.
Is it me, or did he just put that RAM in the wrong slots? Sometimes boards will work like that. I'm lucky if that even boots.
I chose this format of solid-state drive so that I could input it into the motherboard without having to worry about extra wires or putting it in a separate part of the case and just getting really messy. This is from Kingston, and it's 480 gigabytes, so it's not a lot, but you can always upgrade this and swap it out, and it's only held down by one screw and the latch, so it's really simple and really straightforward.
Okay, so where can I start with this? You're investing into a great M.2 form factor NVMe SSD. They already cost, although they've come down a lot, they already cost enough. Are you really going to take that M2 and truly swap it out for a higher capacity one later, the same as you would a SATA SSD, or would you just copy files around? Go buy a PCIe card or a larger standard SATA SSD if budget is truly a concern. But roughly, if you're getting a 500 to a 1 terabyte, 500 gig to 1 terabyte drive now, that should be plenty of capacity for most gaming machines. Or again, do what I do where you'll have fast local storage for your OS games, but then 4, 8, 12, whatever terabytes platter drives for your media, photos, whatever else that might be too big, or maybe a Steam cache that you don't want on your OS drive. Here it looks like he's literally putting in one M2 drive and expecting the entire system to be fine with that, which it would be, but depends on how many games he wants to install.
Speed for gaming is important when it comes to a hard drive. You want files to write quickly and you want games to load quickly, so that's why it's best if you use an SSD. Okay, so step 4, we're going to install the graphics card. I chose PNY's GTX 1080, which is overclocked, and so it's a pretty easy installation. You're just going to find the gold connectors.
Totally objective personal opinion. PNY? Gross. Why didn't you go with Asus or EVGA or something? It's a gaming machine, not even a 1080 Ti. sad face.
And you're going to line this bracket with the back end bracket of your PC case. Now, which lane you choose depends entirely on what other parts you're going to put in the system. I'm just going to pick the top one because the SSD is at the bottom and I don't want to cover it. I just think it looks nice.
No. No mention of PCIe lanes. No mention of motherboard slot preference. Complete fail. No active cooling on your M2 drive. I can understand, I guess, why you're not blocking it with the GPU, but picking a lane at random is stupid. Shouldn't really affect performance, but still, stupid.
Click down. Take your remaining brackets and just put them in the spots that you haven't used.
Usually I do my brackets first, make sure they're all in with parts, and then just take out what I need rather than pull them all out just to put them back in, but okay.
You don't have to screw these in. They get bolted down by the back end bracket. And
keep in mind that is unique to that case. Your slot retention in this case is a fold pressure plate. Most cases do require each PCIe slot to have that screw put back in to hold either the retention plate or part of the card that you put in. So keep that in mind. This is not true for every case.
And your GPU is installed. Power supply time. I chose Corsair's 850 watt power supply because I need enough headroom for ray tracing GPUs when they come out, and I don't want to have to upgrade it again.
A ray tracing GPU like the RTX 2070, 2080, 2080 Ti, hopefully a Titan equivalent or Titan V or Quadro equivalent, isn't really going to draw any more power than your 1080 that's already in the machine. These are designed for 250 to 300-ish watts TDP on maximum design load and overclocking by default. The other cards aren't going to draw any more power. Unless you're planning to SLI or NVLink these, which is unlikely, you don't actually really need any more overhead than what you have there. You're drawing the same power as already a high-end X80 Ti card.
So all you have to do is take the brick and make sure that you align it with these little insulating pads so that the power supply doesn't short circuit and come into contact with the rest of the system. So just take it in, slide.
No. Stop. Don't listen to that guy. No. You mean the power supply sits on vibrating or cushioning pads to isolate it slightly from the case. The PSU by design in converting power is fully enclosed circuitry separated from its own housing, which in turn won't affect the PC housing if it's even sitting on or touching it. The vibration or the dampening pads are just there just to cushion it a little bit and to, just so it's not scuffing up your case. It's not going to short circuit anything.
So that the power supply doesn't short circuit and come into contact with the rest of the system. Then nice and easy until you have a snug fit, and then shift it to the back and make sure it's right up against the frame.
Also, well, again, I get this as a beginner video. No mention of 80 plus, no mentioning on why you need a power supply of X watts. I think in this case he said it was 850 or whatever. Just no mention as to, well, the CPU is going to use this much, the GPU is going to be this much, or even a sentence or two of rationale as to, oh, I need a power supply of this capability as to why. It doesn't make the average reader any more informed watching this video as to what power supply they need. That's why calculators and other things exist out there in forums to help you figure this
Now
stuff out.
you just take the required screws and you tighten and screw in. So next step, we're going to install the CPU cooler. In this case, it's going to go on the top end of the case, and we're just going to have the hose hang out for a little while until we install the processor, which is going to come a little later. Always be sure to try to place it in the system first before you install it, because you can see it takes up a lot of space.
Again, well, test fitting is important. This is why sizing up your parts before you buy a case and hoping on a whim that everything will fit is important. Now obviously on my X299 build, where I didn't truly know the size of the radiators, but I had researched enough to know that this case would be able to fit radiators and have the space and piping range I need to fit parts. As an overhead, I shot bigger than what I had anticipated, or rather sized to my needs. So again, that wouldn't be an issue if we'd sized things prior.
But in this case, no pun intended, it fits in perfectly, and we're gonna start screwing it in. And so there's nothing special about this screwing in process. They're just really long screws because they go through the entire frame.
Also, why didn't you put the CPU in first when you had the board outside of the machine? That's usually what's super easy, and then you can either wait to put on your cooler later, or if you have a small AIO or traditional heatsink, you can attach that before you put it into the chassis or in the case, where you tend to have less room to work with. On the screws, okay, I'll knock you half off for that. If you've referenced my X299 video, and I think it's part 2, sure, you can see me screwing my fans over and over and over like a stupid monkey, because I also didn't realize from visual sight 30 to 35 mil screws are about, that far apart. So I couldn't tell those were fan screws as opposed to radiator screws. So clearly he should be putting fans at the top there with the case if it allows for it, and that's why they're not screwing all the way down, because you're supposed to put fans down to the plates on them. And yes, if you mess them up, they take forever. But at least in my video, I also annotated it and double-checked before I published it, saying, yeah, this screwed me up. This is what I realized because I screwed it up. Don't do this. This is how I fixed it and realized what I did wrong. Here, not the case.
The cooler, and they take forever. So next up, cables. Every power supply is going to come with a big bag of Velcro cables. It's kind of daunting at first, so you always have to find the ones that are going to fit. In this case, you need to match those cables with the correct descriptions on the power supply. Next step is we're connecting the power.
That's true. Every power supply is a little different and should include cables to connect every port on their power supply. So again, keep your power supply manual around in case you ever need to reference anything, but once you do a few builds, it is pretty easy just to match them up and know where they go.
Power supply to the motherboard with a 24-pin cable. We're just matching that cable from the motherboard, threading it through the back, and attaching the 24-pin header to the power supply so that we can have one of the connections complete. The next few additions will be for the GPU, for any specific ports that the case has, for any lighting that the case has, the CPU cooler, anything else really.
Even a cursory glance at looking at wiring up your chassis I/O would be great, because again, every board is a little different. Even zooming in as to here's your power light, reset if your case has that, power button, and so on. Just to look at that, even if you're not going to explain it all, is really helpful, because that's, at least for me as a personal builder with eyesight challenges, is generally the hardest part of getting builds up and running, and sometimes polarity on those ports, on those pins does matter. Sometimes not, sometimes it does. But here nothing is mentioned about that.
We're installing the CPU, the heart of the computer or the brain, depending on how you look at it.
Again, waiting till this is almost done to do the CPU? Why didn't you do it first?
So to do this, we're just going to remove the plastic covering that they put on the motherboard. We're just going to take this little plastic part out. We'll just toss that out of here.
Remove the socket retention plate, or, actually pop it off when you install the CPU itself, because it's meant to do that.
And now we have an exposed CPU holder, or rather slot.
You mean a socket?
On the motherboard. And we're going to use the CPU applicator. This is a special little part that not everyone may get, but this motherboard that we got from ASUS definitely does have. It's called a CPU installation tool. It makes it really useful if you want to install...
Hold on. Zero need for a CPU installation tool. An applicator may be on larger 2066 socket or Threadripper chips, or something that can help you spread your thermal paste a little bit on a CPU that's that small, unless you're using standoffs or backplates or something that board would require additional installation for your CPU cooling method. There seems to be zero need for that at all. Not even necessary if you apply thermal compound correctly.
A Core i7 hexa-core CPU. Yeah, we've got one, and it's
An i7 hexa-core CPU. I mean, it's a good chip, but really, dude, for anyone following my machines, I had in my X79 build, Melchior, I had my 4930K in there well over 10 years ago. That's not exactly up to date. Maybe at least an 8-core, 8700K, 8800K, 8086, maybe a high-end desktop, maybe a Ryzen 7, something greater than 6-core today would be pretty fitting, but no, dude, it's 2018, 2011 called. They want their CPU back.
It's an 8th generation chip, and it's ready to go, and it supports overclocking.
Nearly all chips today support overclocking. You can explain for your viewers that for Intel SKUs, that's the K models are what you'd want before a buyer goes out and buys the wrong chip without doing any research. But even then, you mention overclocking. Are we going to get into any in this video? No. Not at all. So does it really matter? Probably not.
So what having this little installer does for you is it's basically a brace that you can apply right to the CPU and light it up with the triangles that you'll see on the bottom left corners. And this will make it easier for us to...
You know, the CPU itself and sometimes the actual socket have notches and matching triangles and orientation, so you know you're putting it in right. You don't need the tool at all, but if it helps you in a tight space, more power to you.
Apply it to the motherboard, and then apply thermal paste, and then apply a CPU cooler on top. And we're just going to carefully lean it down into the system and make sure that everything lines up, and we're going to clasp down on it and we'll be good to go. So we're about to apply thermal paste to the CPU. Every CPU cooler actually comes with a bit of thermal paste already neatly applied in a circle around it, but it's usually not enough. It's good, essentially PC building practice to have a little bit extra and layer it on top of the CPU. The final portion is to add the CPU cooler.
Hold on. Back up the bus here. Full stop. No. First, not every cooler has CPU thermal paste applied. Have you ever installed a giant heatsink metallic tower? Most of them, when you pull off the bottom label for their protective metal cleanliness from the factory, no, they don't have thermal paste. Any water cooling kits don't have thermal paste. Most heatsink towers don't have thermal paste. Almost all AIOs do have thermal paste. So it depends on whether you're doing a traditional heatsink fan, air cooling tower or air cooling system, an AIO, or full water. Many coolers don't have thermal paste, so be sure to be aware of that when you buy it, and buy a couple bucks of extra thermal paste just in case, and sometimes even in most boxes they include it, and most manufacturers are fine. Cooler Master, Icy Diamond, Arctic Silver, Cryonaut, I think there's plenty of them out there that they all do a relatively decent job when applied correctly within a few degrees of each other. As long as it's truly a no-name brand, using thermal paste is fine. Also, while there's generally sufficient enough thermal paste on an AIO to handle the CPUs that product is mated for and designed for, too much thermal compound can ooze into the other parts in the board, drip down, cause component issues, get into slots, and actually impede cooling because you're putting too much material between the CPU and what's removing the heat. So actually having too much thermal paste is a bad thing. If you have to add thermal paste, use some alcohol, napkins, towels, Q-tips, tissues, and wipe off and clean the original, either the CPU if you put some on, or the AIO heat spreader plate. Clean off what already has thermal paste on it before you apply new thermal paste.
To the top end of the processor. So you're gonna see that there are 4 brackets, or rather like screws in here with brackets and holders right here. And they're going to keep the cooler raised off the processor, but it's also gonna be close enough to actually physically come in contact with it, like basically keep it cool. Take thumb screws like this and just screw them on. So now that our internals are done, we're gonna put all the panels back on.
So your cooler is raised off the processor, but touching the processor, yet it's cooling the processor. All you really have to say is just your AIO is aligned to cool your processor if it lines up onto the chip correctly and is screwed down. Some have back retention plates on the boards, either pre-installed or for other chips, kit plates are available. Some have spring-loaded standoffs. Every IIO and water block and heatsink is a little different. So again, read your manual on what method of transferring heat that you've bought, whether air, water, or hybrid. And in the case of the video, a better look at focusing on thumb screws or the insertion process would have been appreciated. It's very hard to see while you're describing it. Also, did you even tighten in a diagonal pattern? Probably not.
Which is the top glass, side glass, front glass, and of course the back panel where all of this fun stuff is happening.
Okay, closing it up. Do you plan to add any mechanical hard drives, SSDs, or anything else before you actually, get the thing running and in service and closed up? I mean, sure, you could shut it down and work with it later, but you're just gonna run the one drive, huh? No other drives at all. Okay, it's super simple.
So we fully built the PC, everything's put together, and we got to the post screen. So what's next? Well, you need a USB flash drive with your Windows installation media on it, and of course a license key. So I plugged that up, installed Windows in a couple of minutes, installed a bunch of drivers, and now we have a fully functioning gaming PC ready to run some games. Right now I've got Arma 3 running at maximum settings, native resolution, which is 1080p HD, and it's running pretty smoothly. Like,
Has a 1080, runs 1080p. Excuse me, but unless you overclock the out of that CPU, you're pretty bottlenecked depending on your game of choice. But again, it's a budget build. I can understand if you don't have a higher monitor to go along with that. But a 1080, like no 1200p, 1440, 4K, like just 1080, you're severely limiting the frame rate depending on what title and how much GPU power is used, or rather how much your CPU can drive the game.
I'm averaging 70 and 80 FPS, and this is normally like a very intensive game to
I don't know if Arma 3 has a demo. I might try it just to see.
run, and it's still doing a pretty good job. So right now I'm playing League of Legends. It's one of my favorite games. I'm actually playing against a bot, and I'm distracted, so I'm not actually doing so well. But otherwise, like, this is...
Don't worry, man. I think I play League just as bad. I'm not good at it. Sad face.
pretty much what you would see me do on a gaming computer. Test stuff out, and hopefully have really high frame rates like I am right now. I'm averaging 120 FPS, and that's only because I've actually locked the game to that frame rate, because I can get around 300 FPS playing League on maximum settings, which is a little bit absurd, and you don't really need that, so I've locked it. Building a gaming desktop has been a great experience. I'm able to max out a lot of my favorite titles, and I'll be able to play a lot of upcoming titles like Battlefield 5 and Cyberpunk 2077 without worrying too much about the parts I have.
Are you sure about that? I mean, yes, that's a pretty nice, compact, pretty, decent gaming PC there, but okay, if that's an i5 chip, sure. Casual games, NBF5 is no problem. Have you checked the requirements for Cyberpunk 2077? I looked into that, and if you want to max that on full settings, which people as, gamers, we like to do, as why we have PCs and buy expensive hardware. If you want to max that, that's an i7 recommended with 16 gigs of RAM suggested tentatively. Your machine is only matching the recommended, not even exceeding it, so expect some FPS loss, and that's at 1080. Again, let alone you're trying this at 1200p, 1440p, or 4K, 2160p, or anything higher, or if there's something like an ultra setting or epic or whatnot that goes even higher than just the game's high or typical maximum. But since that machine looks like it's, I think it was an i5 or i7 6-core with 16 gigs of RAM, for some of these higher intensive titles, maybe like Final Fantasy 15 could definitely be another one right now. You might be surprised, dude, if you're trying to push max settings as to how much power some of these newer titles require. Even with a 1080, which is a good card, like, you're still baseline. You probably have to drop some settings.
When ray tracing GPUs come out, for example, I'll be able to upgrade without having to buy a completely new system.
Upgradability, I mean, that's the point of building a PC.
And if I have a problem down the line, I can always just swap out a part and have it serviced.
Sadly, computers, they're not like appliances. Servicing a GPU, I could see that. I mean, laptops, yes, we're used to having parts fixed or replaced, or you RMA parts if something doesn't work as DOA or just fails. I mean, we've all had to do that. I've had a couple cards I've had to do that too. But broadly speaking, you're not servicing unless you're just RMAing, you're replacing the part and just continuing on. It doesn't work the same like having a technician call out and, oh, I'm just going to swap this in and you're good,
rather than losing my whole computer. And of course now we also have a computer to test and benchmark games here at the Verge.
Really? The Verge? Like, your whole studio, your whole publication, you didn't already have a good baseline PC sitting around for your editors that you could use for gaming tests? For as large as you guys are, or as funded as you guys are?
Thanks for watching.
That cable management is horrid. Just, no. Alright guys, so with that being said, here's my wrap-up thoughts. I'm going to really give this like a 3 of 10. Some parts of the build guide are good advice. It leaves a lot to be desired. it needs more information provided, or is just flat out wrong. As a well-respected publication focusing on reviews, phones, journalism, one would think that more time would have been spent making sure that, especially a guide that others will follow, that you took the diligence to make sure that this was even presented correctly, with as few mistakes as possible would have been done. I'm literally surprised your machine didn't post loop or throw other errors just because of how you have the parts in. No mention of wiring up the chassis again, which is it's tiny and usually very challenging to see, and first-time builders may not realize needs to be done. No one mentioned, also sure, like you got Windows running and that's fine. No one mentioned installing Intel drivers, motherboard drivers, any GPU drivers, anything else in order, even though there is more software and is, kind of the often overlooked side of building a gaming PC. If you don't install some of these chipsets and drivers to make your components work optimally or to their best, you could run into blue screens and various stability issues, meaning you're not going to game. And that's not fun. But again, software I get is a little bit beyond the scope of this video, though it is integral to doing a PC build. And, oh, you never touched a single thing about the BIOS, meaning I'm guessing you also didn't overclock. So what's the point of buying an overclocked chip? So, anyway, sorry I'm not looking at here the whole time, trying to just go off this little script and notes I wrote here to go through this. Again, it's not that the entire video is trash, though it's on the verge of being so. But it's more that as a journalistic site, a YouTube publication site like Wired, Tom's Hardware, Hardware Canucks, Gamers Nexus, Jay's 2 Cents, Not His Tech Tips, just goes on and on. A well-respected tech journalism source in the tech space that you're putting out, like I said before, information that people will follow and maybe not do additional research on and think this is the way that they have to do it, when some parts of this are just bizarre at best and mistaken and just wrong at worst, is really shocking. And I saw so many other tech channels lambaste The Verge, and rightfully so, enough to where they pulled their video and I had to go rummage for someone's re-upload so I could even comment on this. It's pretty bad when I'm going to make a guide and you do it so wrong, you have to pull it down off YouTube because you screwed it up that much. I'm not sure what to say other than just shaking my head. Anyone watching, if you have computer questions, feel free to post in the comments below. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe. Am I right on my thoughts? Am I a bit too hard on them? Did I maybe miss something else? So I probably didn't see everything on this, but hey, let me know in the comments below, and I'll catch you guys next time for more gaming and tech videos. Thanks for watching.